Most men think hot women get turned off because they didn't say the perfect line. But the truth is, they lose her long before they even realize it. Not because of looks, not because of money, but because of certain behaviors that instantly drain attraction. Today, I'm breaking down the exact things that turn high-value women off fast. If you've ever felt like you were this close to winning her, and then suddenly she became distant, cold, or uninterested, this is why. Neediness is one of the most subtle yet deadly killers of attraction, and what makes it especially dangerous is that it often disguises itself as genuine interest or affection. Many men think that texting constantly, calling multiple times a day, or showering a woman with compliments is a sign of care and attention, but in reality, it can communicate the opposite. It communicates that your happiness and validation are contingent on her responses, that your sense of self-worth is tied to how she reacts to you, and that you are seeking something from her rather than offering your authentic presence. High-value women can feel this energy instantly, even if the words themselves seem kind or thoughtful. It's not what you say, it's the emotional undertone behind it, the desperation lurking beneath what is presented as interest, that creates an invisible barrier between attraction and repulsion. The moment she senses that your energy is dependent on her rather than your own stability, what might have started as intrigue subtly begins to fade. This neediness often manifests in behaviors that seem harmless or even caring on the surface, such as over-checking in, wanting constant reassurance, or bending over backward to accommodate every whim, but each action inadvertently signals insecurity. For example, a man might feel compelled to respond immediately to every message, thinking that delay will appear disinterested, but in reality, it communicates a subtle anxiety about losing her attention. Similarly, excessive compliments or validation-seeking questions like, "Do you like me?" or "Are you mad at me?" come across as a silent admission that your confidence is fragile, that you cannot be at ease in your own skin without her approval. Women, especially those who are experienced and self-assured, do not respond to words alone. They respond to the emotional consistency, the groundedness, and the self-possession behind the words. When a man's interest is overshadowed by a need to be needed, attraction diminishes because it reverses the natural dynamic of energy exchange, making her feel responsible for holding his emotional state together. Neediness also often intersects with over-explaining and justifying actions, which is another unconscious signal of desperation. Men who feel insecure may feel compelled to narrate their intentions, clarify their emotions excessively, or justify why they acted a certain way in order to avoid conflict or rejection. While this might seem like transparency, it is often a form of subtle pleading, a way of saying, "Please don't judge me, please like me, please don't leave." This can be exhausting to receive because it shifts the weight of the interaction onto her, making her feel scrutinized and burdened rather than intrigued. When interactions consistently carry this undertone, the energy changes from playful curiosity and mutual exploration to a one-sided effort to stabilize someone else's emotional needs. The dynamic ceases to feel magnetic, and instead, it begins to feel transactional and draining, even if the intentions behind it were pure or affectionate. Emotional control is one of those invisible qualities that separates men who attract effortlessly from those who struggle to hold a woman's interest. It's not about suppressing feelings or pretending to be stoic. It's about the ability to regulate responses and maintain a stable presence regardless of external circumstances. A man who loses control of his emotions, whether through anger, jealousy, impatience, or frustration, communicates instability, and instability is a massive turnoff for women who are self-assured and accustomed to dealing with mature energy. Emotional outbursts, impulsive reactions, and mood swings are not just minor inconveniences. They create a subtle but powerful sense of unpredictability that triggers an instinctive withdrawal. Women do not need to consciously analyze it. Their subconscious picks up on inconsistencies and tension, and attraction begins to fade long before any explicit conflict arises. What might seem like passion or intensity, from one perspective, can often feel like volatility and a lack of safety from another. And safety, emotional and energetic, is one of the pillars of lasting attraction. A man who lacks emotional control often reacts to perceived slights or misunderstandings in ways that magnify minor issues into conflicts that feel disproportionate. For instance, a simple delay in response to a message can spark overthinking, suspicion, or even anger, which is then communicated either overtly through words or subtly through tone and energy. Similarly, impulsive jealousy, checking her social interactions, questioning her motives, or projecting insecurities may feel justified internally, but externally it signals a lack of inner stability. Women notice this not as a single act, but as a pattern, a constant undercurrent that shifts the dynamic from playful engagement to tension-filled interaction. The energy of a man who cannot manage his emotions communicates a silent message that she is responsible for stabilizing his feelings, and that role reversal is naturally unappealing because it burdens her with responsibility she never signed up for. Over time, the charm, attraction, and excitement that once existed are replaced by subtle discomfort, stress, or avoidance, even if there has been no major argument or explicit conflict. What makes emotional instability particularly damaging is that it corrodes confidence from the inside out. A man who reacts impulsively or lets his emotions dictate his decisions comes across as less reliable, less trustworthy, and less capable of handling challenges. High-value women who often navigate their own complex lives and maintain their own standards are drawn to men who bring a sense of groundedness, calm, and emotional strength. When a man lacks these qualities, his words lose impact because they are overshadowed by his unpredictable behavior. Furthermore, over time, emotional volatility often triggers a cycle of over-apologizing, defensiveness, or attempts to overcompensate, which only reinforces the perception of insecurity. It is not the occasional frustration that pushes her away. It is the consistent inability to regulate and own one's internal state, which communicates dependency on external validation and control, and diminishes the natural flow of attraction, respect, and intrigue that forms the foundation of compelling masculine energy. Boundaries are the invisible lines that define a man's sense of self, his values, and the respect he demands from the world around him. A man with weak personal boundaries rarely realizes how much this undermines attraction because it often masquerades as kindness, flexibility, or a desire to please. On the surface, saying yes to everything, never asserting opinions or constantly accommodating others, can appear considerate or even charming. But in reality, it communicates a lack of self-respect and a willingness to sacrifice personal standards for approval. High-value women are instinctively drawn to men who possess integrity, self-possession, and a sense of inner authority. When those qualities are missing, the dynamic shifts subtly but powerfully. She begins to sense that the man is easily influenced, lacks personal direction, and will bend under pressure or manipulation. Attraction thrives on balance, the interplay of energy where each person carries their own weight, maintains their dignity, and demonstrates self-sufficiency. Weak boundaries collapse that balance, leaving her with the sense that she is interacting with someone whose energy is malleable, unanchored, and ultimately unsatisfying to engage with on a deep, instinctual level. Men with weak boundaries often struggle to say no, even when they feel uncomfortable, overextend themselves to maintain connection, or compromise their values to avoid conflict. What might seem like generosity or adaptability is subconsciously interpreted as dependency and passivity, signaling that the man cannot uphold his own standard of self respect. For example, constantly rearranging personal priorities to fit someone else's needs may temporarily create a sense of closeness, but over time it communicates a lack of self direction and a willingness to sacrifice identity for approval. This pattern is especially damaging in romantic interactions because it creates an imbalance where the woman unconsciously assumes a managerial or controlling role, whether she intends to or not. She may feel compelled to guide, direct, or subtly dictate choices to compensate for his lack of defined boundaries, which shifts her energy from attraction to responsibility. Once this shift occurs, the initial spark of chemistry diminishes because attraction is never built on caretaking or filling voids. It is built on respect, intrigue, and the perception that the man can hold his own, both energetically and emotionally, without needing her to reinforce it. Another subtle but powerful consequence of weak boundaries is that they erode self-esteem over time. A man who consistently allows his time, energy, and decisions to be dictated by external pressures sends a message to himself and others that his priorities are negotiable and that he lacks conviction. High value women who often navigate their own demanding lives and maintain personal standards are quick to sense this energetic deficiency. They notice patterns of overaccommodation, hesitation to assert opinions, or difficulty maintaining personal space, and instinctively categorize these behaviors as unattractive. Women do not respond to words alone. They respond to energy, consistency, and the internal logic of a man's life. When boundaries are weak, it communicates that he cannot protect his own space or honor his values, which diminishes trust, security, and attraction. What appears to be a man trying to be nice or easygoing can in fact convey a fundamental lack of self-possession, making interactions feel draining rather than magnetic. Weak personal boundaries are one of the most subtle yet powerful ways a man can kill attraction without even realizing it. On the surface, it may appear as though he is being kind, flexible, or accommodating, but in reality, it communicates an inability to respect himself, his time, and his values. High value women instinctively notice when a man allows his personal space, his opinions, and his priorities to be constantly compromised for the sake of pleasing others. What starts as small concessions, saying yes when he wants to say no, agreeing with everything she says to avoid conflict, or bending his own schedule to accommodate hers, slowly chips away at his presence and his energy. Attraction thrives on the perception of self-possession, on the subtle tension of a man who has his own life, his own standards, and his own priorities. When boundaries are weak, that tension disappears, leaving the interaction flat and predictable. A woman doesn't consciously analyze it, but she feels the difference immediately. She senses that she is not engaging with a man who can hold his own, but with someone whose energy is pliable and easily swayed, and instinctively that diminishes desire. Weak boundaries often manifest in ways that appear innocent or even generous, but they subconsciously communicate dependency and passivity. A man might go along with plans he doesn't enjoy, suppress his true opinions to avoid confrontation, or constantly prioritize someone else's needs over his own. At first, these behaviors may create a sense of harmony or compliance, but over time, they shift the dynamic in subtle, damaging ways. The woman begins to feel responsible for managing his life, choices, and emotional energy, whether she wants to or not. This shift from attraction to responsibility is rarely conscious, yet it kills the natural flow of intrigue and desire. Instead of feeling drawn to a man who has his own gravity, she feels weighed down by someone whose presence requires guidance and constant validation. Weak boundaries blur the line between respect and control, attraction and obligation, and in that blur, desire quietly fades. Another layer of weak boundaries is the erosion of a man's own self respect, which becomes perceptible in the energy he carries. When a man constantly compromises his standards to avoid conflict or gain approval, he sends a subtle message to himself and others that his values are negotiable, his needs are secondary, and his identity is flexible. Women, especially those who are confident and self assured, are highly sensitive to this energetic signal. They do not respond to words alone, they respond to consistency, clarity, and the internal strength of a man's presence. Over time, weak boundaries make a man less compelling, less trustworthy, and less magnetic because they indicate a lack of self possession, a lack of direction, and a lack of inner authority. A man who cannot protect his own energy or honor his personal space becomes someone whose attention, commitment, and engagement are always in question, and that uncertainty quietly erodes attraction. One of the most overlooked yet attraction killing behaviors is when a man performs instead of simply being himself. This often starts innocently. He wants to impress, to seem interesting, to appear confident or successful, and he begins curating every word, every gesture, every post, and every story to match what he thinks she wants to see. On the surface, it might look like charm, charisma, or even self assurance, but under the surface, it communicates insecurity. When a man is performing, he is not operating from his authentic self. He is operating from a mask, from a projection designed to elicit approval or admiration. High value women, those who are confident and intuitive, feel this instantly. They don't need to analyze why. Their instincts pick up the subtle energy of someone who is trying to convince the world of who he thinks he should be, rather than showing who he truly is. The problem is not the occasional boast or the desire to put your best foot forward. The problem is when your entire energy revolves around performance rather than presence. Attraction is built on truth, on depth, and on the raw energy of a man who stands in his own power without needing validation. Performing often leads to overcompensation in multiple areas. Men might exaggerate their achievements, overemphasize their confidence, or artificially inflate their social status in attempts to seem more appealing. They may mimic behaviors they've observed in other successful men, repeat phrases that seem impressive, or adopt a personality that isn't aligned with their natural temperament. At first, these actions can be convincing because they create a sense of novelty or excitement, but eventually, the inconsistency between the performance and the authentic self becomes noticeable. Women are highly attuned to energy, not just words. When a man's energy is rooted in performance, it carries an undercurrent of tension, effort, and inauthenticity, which can be sensed even when everything appears perfect on the surface. This subtle dissonance triggers a form of subconscious distrust because attraction thrives on authenticity. It thrives on the unspoken assurance that a man is reliable, grounded, and comfortable in his own skin. A man who performs sends the opposite signal that he is adaptable, malleable, and dependent on external validation to sustain his sense of identity. Another critical aspect of performing is that it creates pressure, both internally and externally. Internally, the man becomes trapped in maintaining the image he's crafted, constantly monitoring his behavior to ensure it aligns with the persona he believes will impress her. Externally, the woman senses the effort, even if she cannot articulate it, and this effortless appeal, the magnetic pull of a man simply being himself, is lost. Authenticity carries a quiet confidence that performance cannot replicate. Women are drawn to the natural rhythm of someone who owns their identity, who speaks and acts from truth rather than expectation, and who allows imperfection to coexist with strength. Performance, no matter how polished, lacks that organic magnetism. It communicates a subtle insecurity that becomes exhausting over time, creating distance, reducing trust, and diminishing the very attraction the man is attempting to manufacture. Attraction is deeply tied to the perception of a man's purpose and direction in life. High value women, in particular, are drawn to men who have clarity in their goals, a sense of ambition, and a structured approach to life. Unclear masculine direction, on the other hand, is one of the most subtle yet potent ways to turn women off. When a man drifts through life without defined priorities, appears indecisive in his choices, or relies on external forces to dictate his path, it communicates a lack of internal leadership and self-possession. Women are instinctively drawn to energy that feels grounded, intentional, and forward-moving. A man without direction radiates the opposite. It's not about having a perfect career, massive wealth, or a rigid 5-year plan. It's about demonstrating consistency, initiative, and the ability to navigate life with a sense of purpose. When a man lacks this, he unintentionally communicates that he is reactive rather than proactive, dependent rather than autonomous, and that the weight of decision-making, responsibility, and initiative may fall onto her shoulders. Indecisiveness in even small areas of life can have a surprisingly large impact on attraction. For instance, repeatedly delaying plans, avoiding commitments, or asking for guidance on decisions a man should naturally make sends an energetic signal of uncertainty and lack of ownership. Women may initially overlook minor lapses, but over time, the accumulation of small decisions that lack confidence or clarity erodes respect. It subtly communicates that he is not leading his own life, and attraction thrives when there is a balance between masculine and feminine energy, where the man is leading with stability and direction, and the woman can naturally relax into her own energy. Without this, the dynamic becomes frustrating, confusing, and eventually disengaging. Women subconsciously assess whether a man can navigate life independently, handle challenges with composure, and create an environment of reliability and safety, and unclear direction signals the opposite. Lack of direction also impacts the emotional and energetic presence a man brings into interactions. When a man is unsure of his goals, priorities, or identity, it translates into uncertainty in his communication, inconsistency in his behavior, and a diffuse energy that is hard to connect with. Women respond more to energy than words, and energy that lacks focus or momentum is inherently less attractive. This does not mean perfection or rigid control, but rather a sense that he knows who he is, what he wants, and how he is moving toward it. Men with unclear direction often try to compensate by over-explaining, over-promising, or attempting to impress through external markers like possessions, charm, or humor. But these performative gestures cannot replace the magnetic pull of authentic purpose. Authentic direction communicates self-reliance, competence, and the ability to carry life forward, all of which naturally draw women toward a man because it signals stability, leadership, and the capacity to create a life worth being part of. The subtle danger of unclear masculine direction is that it erodes attraction gradually rather than abruptly. Women sense patterns, energy, and consistency more than individual words or actions. A man without direction may seem exciting or charming at first, but over time, the lack of clarity becomes exhausting. She may find herself making decisions for him, filling gaps in his life, or questioning whether he is capable of handling challenges independently. And this slowly shifts her energy from intrigue to responsibility. Women are instinctively drawn to men who lead themselves before leading others, who have clarity of purpose before they seek connection, and who possess the internal authority to navigate life with confidence. Inconsistent communication is one of the most underestimated yet powerful ways to erode attraction in any interaction. Words alone rarely hold the weight of energy, intention, and follow through. And high value women are exceptionally sensitive to the alignment between what a man says and what he does. When a man's communication is inconsistent, when he is hot one moment and cold the next, expressive one day and distant the next, or when his words do not match his actions, it creates a subtle but powerful sense of instability. Women do not consciously think about it. They feel it in the rhythm of the interaction. Inconsistent communication triggers a psychological response because it creates unpredictability and tension. Human beings are wired to seek stability, clarity, and patterns in behavior, especially in relationships or potential connections. When communication is erratic, it undermines trust, diminishes attraction, and shifts the energy from excitement and curiosity to confusion and caution. The more unpredictable the pattern, the more a woman begins to subconsciously distance herself, even if she cannot articulate exactly why the dynamic feels off. This inconsistency often manifests in seemingly small, everyday behaviors that collectively carry a heavy impact. For instance, a man might respond immediately and enthusiastically to messages one day, then delay or ignore them the next, without explanation. He may express interest verbally, but fail to follow through with action, cancel plans unpredictably, or shift between emotional availability and detachment without any context. On the surface, these may seem like minor lapses or excusable inconsistencies, but to a perceptive woman, they signal emotional unreliability. Over time, repeated patterns of inconsistent communication chip away at attraction because they subtly suggest a lack of priority, focus, and reliability. Even if the man has the best intentions, the energetic impact of inconsistency communicates, "You cannot rely on me to match my words with my actions." And this is one of the quickest ways to trigger disengagement, insecurity, or subconscious withdrawal. Inconsistent communication also creates emotional whiplash. Women who are attuned to energy can feel drawn in during moments of engagement, excitement, or warmth, only to experience confusion or frustration when that energy disappears or shifts unexpectedly. This unpredictability does not generate intrigue, it generates stress. Over time, the excitement and curiosity that fuel attraction are replaced by caution, skepticism, and subtle emotional fatigue. A man may attempt to explain or justify his inconsistency, but the reality is that attraction is not built on explanations. It is built on patterns of alignment, reliability, and presence. When a man fails to deliver consistent communication, he inadvertently signals a lack of discipline, focus, and consideration, which erodes not only trust, but also desire. Women intuitively assess patterns more than promises, and inconsistent communication disrupts the flow of connection, making interactions feel unstable, draining, and unfulfilling. Another layer to consider is that inconsistency often signals deeper internal issues, such as insecurity, indecision, or lack of emotional regulation. A man who oscillates between engagement and withdrawal may be reacting to internal fears rather than external circumstances, and this reactive energy is sensed immediately. Women pick up on these subtle cues unconsciously, and the resulting impression is not of playfulness or mystery, but of emotional unpredictability. The magnetic pull of attraction thrives on clarity, presence, and a sense of reliability, and inconsistent communication undermines all three. It shifts the dynamic from mutual exploration to subtle anxiety, leaving her unsure of where she stands, how to respond, or how much energy to invest. Attraction is never random, and it is never built on surface level qualities alone. It is an energetic dance, a delicate interplay between presence, confidence, consistency, and authenticity. Every behavior, every word, every subtle signal communicates far more than what is spoken. Neediness, emotional volatility, weak boundaries, performing instead of being authentic, lack of direction, and inconsistent communication are not minor mistakes. They are silent killers of attraction that push women away without a single dramatic confrontation. What high value women respond to is not perfection, wealth, or charm alone. They respond to the energy of a man who is grounded, self assured, and fully present in his own life. The patterns you set, the way you carry yourself, and the consistency of your energy speak louder than any line, gift, or gesture. Mastering these areas is not about manipulation. It is about reclaiming your inner authority, your confidence, and your ability to create a magnetic presence that naturally draws women in. When you embody clarity, emotional stability, authentic expression, strong boundaries, purpose, and reliable communication, attraction is no longer something you chase. It becomes a natural consequence of the energy you radiate,